All right, so now let's look at how we could use in-depth interviews in this particular circumstance to help us. So we might look at a research article that has looked at interviews in a particular situation similar to this to understand how patients make sense of disparities. How do they understand what's happening to them? How are they describing what's happening to them? Because if we want to know what interventions to employ, it would be helpful to know, it could be helpful to know how they themselves understand and how they themselves are characterizing their experiences. If you are at a macro level, again, you could use, like, for example, policy or community organizing or management. You could also, similarly to ethnography, you could use the information about how people are describing their experiences and how people are understanding their experiences to inform policies and create perhaps better training, or even potentially create a grievance process, allowing patients to confidentially express concerns about a particular treatment experience or interaction with staff or doctors, or sometimes even other patients. So these are ways that interviews could be really helpful in informing your work as a social worker in a situation like this. So now we're going to talk about narrative research. Narrative research is less commonly used than ethnography and interviews. Those tend to be the most common forms of qualitative research. But narrative research comes up, and certainly in social work it is a very valid form of qualitative research. So here I'm going to talk about the basic principles of narrative research, some advantages, some constraints. We're going to also talk about how you can evaluate the quality of narrative research and how you could use narrative research in your social work practice based on the hypothetical that we've used throughout. So some of the basic principles for narrative research are as follows. Narrative research tends to examine people's lived and told stories. So this also kind of overlaps a little bit with interviews and documents, in that someone who does narrative research might actually use interviews or documents to inform the research about how someone has lived their life and how they are telling the stories of their life. So it may involve something that looks very similar to or it actually may involve something that invokes the methods that we've previously discussed, but for a particular purpose, which is really to get information about someone's particular life experience. Now, the advantage of using narrative research is that it provides an in-depth examination into a complex phenomena or experience. So many things that are complex in one's life surely is something that's complex, is not often something you can capture with just one interview, for example, unless it's, I guess, an extraordinarily long interview, and even then you probably can't capture someone for very long for that. But narrative research allows you to actually get at various ways to get at how someone, their life experience. So I've seen this used in a number of different ways. For example, I've seen it used with how transgender adults have made sense, or youth even, how they make sense of their own coming out experience, meaning their experience with sharing who they are to the world, and that being a gender identity that is different than what they were born with. So that experience is very much about someone's process through life and basically what they've gone through throughout various points in their life to get to that. What's their journey? And that's narrative research has been very effective in that particular type of research. I've also seen it very effectively employed with in research, policy research in particular, that's looking at an immigrant's experience and how they made sense of and how they experienced coming to a new country, what were the obstacles they encountered, what were the forms of resiliency they found through social support. And these are different ways that narrative research can be really effective in telling a story in a research-oriented way. So again, contrasting, narrative research involves like theory and methods that are rigorous. It's not just like a blog, for example. That's basically someone's personal views or someone sharing their own personal stories, which is very useful, but it's just not considered narrative research. So anyway, so the advantages of narrative research is that it provides this in-depth examination of something that's complex. But a constraint, on the flip side, one of the constraints of narrative research is that it's often limited to 1 or 2 people. So you've got this great, really in-depth knowledge and lots of data about this one particular person, or maybe 2 particular people, but you definitely can't generalize, well, all immigrants experience this because this one person told me about their life experience. And that is a really cautionary tale. It's not, researchers tend to not do this, but that's also a way that you can acknowledge or you can identify a narrative researcher versus someone who's engaging in more of a journalistic interview. You're going to see some differences with this and how they understand sort of the methods that they should employ or that they should employ for this particular purpose. So if you see an article or you are interested in looking at narrative research for your social work practice, you're going to want to know, how do I evaluate it, right? So some key things to look at when you're looking at narrative research. One is the depth. So narrative research is something that really is going to it should dive very deeply into the experience of 1 or 2 people. And if it's a superficial analysis, the quality is again, needs improvement. So if it's another thing that you want to look at is this research generating theory? Are they discussing themes? This is a really important part of narrative research and distinguishes it from, say, a biography, which is basically a description of someone's life. So if I were to interview a politician about their experiences becoming a politician, and I write a book about it, that's a biography. But if I'm actually engaging in systematic research and I have methods in place, then that's more like, and I'm developing theories and looking at looking at different themes that emerge, that's more likely to qualify for narrative research, and that distinguishes the quality itself. So let's talk about how we can use narrative research in our social work practice. We're going to use the same hypothetical again so we can kind of compare across methods. So I'll read it again. You are a medical social worker that specializes in cancer treatment. You work with older adults. While your medical clinic serves patients across several counties, including both rural and urban areas, you have noticed that most of your patients come from one county. This county tends to be more rural. You want to understand what factors may be driving this disparity. So how could narrative research help you? Take a moment to reflect on this, and we will come back and discuss this as it pertains to narrative research.